The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when the plane lifted off from New York. It was one of those long flights that made time stretch. Quiet, steady, almost hypnotic. The passengers had already settled into their seats, each one lost in their own small world of screens, thoughts, and routines. Somewhere near the front, in seat 8A by the window, sat a young woman named Claire Monroe. Claire had always loved window seats. There was something peaceful about watching the world drift away beneath her, the city shrinking, the clouds rising up like floating islands. But that morning she wasn't there to enjoy the view. She was simply exhausted. For the last 3 days she had been working almost non-stop. As a travel consultant, her job took her places she never really got to enjoy. Airports, hotels, meetings, and then back again. Her life was a blur of boarding passes and early alarms. And now, after a week of last-minute projects and missed sleep, her body simply gave up. Within minutes of takeoff, she had tilted her head toward the window, closed her eyes, and drifted into a deep sleep. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow. The engines hummed with a rhythm that could almost lull anyone into calm. A few rows behind her, a little boy tried to convince his mother that airplanes could touch the stars. Across the aisle, an older man was reading a newspaper, carefully folding each page. Everything felt normal, but normal is a fragile thing. It can vanish in a heartbeat. About 2 hours into the flight, something changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, but enough for people to notice. The seatbelt sign blinked on again, even though there hadn't been any turbulence. The cabin crew, who had been serving coffee and snacks, exchanged small glances before quietly returning to their stations. No one said anything yet, but the silence that followed felt different. It wasn't the usual peaceful kind. It was waiting for something. Claire didn't notice any of it. She was still asleep, her hand resting on the small leather bag beside her. The rhythmic hum of the engines was like a lullaby, keeping her far away from whatever was about to unfold. Then the intercom crackled. At first it was just static. Then came the familiar voice of the captain. Calm, deep, measured. But there was something else in it too. Something slightly uneven, almost fragile beneath the practiced tone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Those words usually meant nothing more than a friendly update, altitude, weather, or arrival time. But the way he paused after them made everyone lift their heads. The crew froze mid-step. The little boy stopped asking questions. Claire stirred in her seat but didn't wake up completely. She moved slightly, as though hearing a dream. The captain continued. We're currently facing an unexpected situation. I'll need everyone to remain seated and calm while we handle it. The flight attendants will be coming around shortly to assist. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened. There was another pause, shorter this time, but heavy with meaning. Then the intercom clicked off, the cabin filled with whispers. No one knew what unexpected situation meant. It could be anything. A small technical issue, a medical emergency, or something with the weather. Still, people looked at each other, trying to read comfort in strangers' eyes. Claire's seatmate, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a soft accent, glanced around nervously. She hesitated for a moment before gently touching Claire's arm. Excuse me? I think something's happening. Claire blinked awake, her mind foggy. What? She mumbled. The captain said there's a situation, the woman whispered. It took a few seconds for Claire to register where she was. She sat up slowly, rubbed her eyes, and looked around. Everything seemed normal. No alarms, no panic. Just quiet tension hanging in the air. She smiled politely, still half asleep. I'm sure it's nothing serious. But her words didn't sound convincing, not even to herself. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, checking seatbelts, speaking softly, avoiding too much eye contact. They were calm, but there was a certain tightness in their smiles, the kind that comes from rehearsed reassurance. Claire looked out the window. The world below was a soft carpet of clouds, endless and white. There was no sign of anything wrong. Yet something about the silence felt heavy. Even the usual hum of conversation had disappeared. After a few minutes, the intercom came on again. This time, the captain's voice was slightly different. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've had an issue with one of our systems. We're in communication with ground control and will be making a precautionary diversion. There's no need to be alarmed." A diversion. That word echoed through the cabin like a slow ripple. People started asking quiet questions, to their partners, to themselves, to anyone who might know more. Where were they going? What kind of system issue? Claire felt her pulse quicken. She wasn't afraid, not exactly, just unsettled. Her logical side told her that planes diverted all the time for small reasons, but her heart wasn't buying it. She noticed how the flight attendant who passed their row avoided looking directly at anyone. The woman beside her murmured, "My husband's a pilot. They never use the word precautionary, unless something's really wrong." Claire tried to smile again, but her throat was dry. Outside, the sky had changed color, not darker but thicker. The clouds looked heavier, the light softer. The plane tilted slightly, turning. Claire could feel it in her stomach. They were changing course. She glanced at the seatback screen. The flight map showed their route bending sharply eastward. She didn't recognize the city names on the new path. A child started crying softly a few rows behind. His mother whispered soothing words, but her own voice trembled. A man tried to joke about missing his connecting flight, but no one laughed. The captain hadn't spoken again. For the next 30 minutes, the silence grew deeper. The flight attendants stayed strapped in, communicating with each other through small hand signals. The engine's steady sound became almost haunting, the only constant in a cabin filled with unspoken fear. Claire leaned back, staring at the small reflection of her face in the window. She thought about her life, how quickly it all moved, how often she promised herself she'd slow down someday. Now, sitting miles above the earth, she realized how fragile someday really was. Suddenly, the intercom came alive once more, and this time there was no mistaking the tension in the captain's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask for your full attention." Every head lifted, every breath paused. "We're dealing with a technical fault that requires immediate action. I need all passengers to follow the crew's instructions carefully. Please stay seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. We may experience some discomfort as we descend." Descend. That word hit differently. It wasn't part of any calm announcement. It carried weight, a quiet urgency. Claire gripped the armrest. The engines changed pitch, deeper, louder, like a growl under the plane's skin. The plane was descending faster than usual. People exchanged nervous looks. A few reached for each other's hands. The mother hugged her son close. The older man folded his newspaper carefully, as though wanting to keep his routine intact for as long as possible. Claire turned to the window again. The clouds were rushing past now. She couldn't see land, just gray, endless gray. Then, for the first time, she saw something that truly made her heart skip. A thin stream of vapor trailing off the left wing. It could have been normal condensation, she told herself. Planes always did that, but somehow, it looked different. Uneven, scattered like something struggling to stay steady. Her seatmate noticed it too. "Is that normal?" Claire didn't know what to say. She forced a nod, even as her palms began to sweat. The captain's voice returned, softer now. "We'll be attempting a controlled landing shortly. Our crew is trained for this. Please trust them and remain calm. Controlled landing." Another phrase that wasn't supposed to sound scary but did. The woman beside her whispered a prayer. Claire just sat still, eyes locked on the window, as the clouds broke open to reveal faint patches of land below, a coastline maybe. Somewhere deep inside her, she felt something shift. She realized that moments like this, uncertain, fragile, had a strange way of making people see what truly mattered. She thought of her parents, her best friend back home, and the email she never replied to. She thought of how she'd always postponed small joys for bigger plans that never came. The plane jolted slightly, snapping her back to the present. The cabin filled with a soft gasp. But the captain didn't speak again. The crew just moved through the aisles, checking buckles, murmuring encouragement. Claire closed her eyes. The hum of the engines was steady again, but different, strained like something working too hard. She breathed deeply, counting each second. In that moment, surrounded by strangers, she realized something else. No one was alone. Every person in that cabin, no matter their story, their fears, or their regrets, was part of the same fragile hope, the hope of landing safely. And as the plane began its slow descent through the trembling sky, Claire whispered a quiet promise to herself. If she made it through this, if they all did, she would live differently. She would stop rushing through life as if time were endless. She would start noticing things, the smell of rain, the warmth of sunlight, the comfort of small kindnesses. She didn't know what was happening up front in the cockpit, or what kind of decision the captain had to make. All she knew was that, somewhere behind that locked door, the words "emergency landing" echoed through the cabin like a quiet wave. No one screamed. No one moved. It was a kind of silence that had its own sound, heavy, deep, filled with unspoken prayers. Claire felt her fingers trembling as she gripped the hand of the woman beside her. The stranger's hand was warm but slightly shaking too. Together they held on as if that simple human touch could keep them both steady. The engine still hummed, but there was a new rhythm to it, like a heart beating too fast. The plane began to descend slowly, and the light outside turned from bright white clouds to a soft gray mist. The captain's voice came again, firm but kind. "We are diverting to an airport nearby. The crew will prepare you for landing. Please follow every instruction carefully. You are safe. We are trained for this." His calm tone was almost comforting. Almost. The flight attendants began to move down the aisle again, speaking softly but clearly. They showed passengers how to brace, how to sit, what to expect. Their voices were steady, practiced from countless drills, but their eyes revealed just a hint of fear. Claire listened carefully. Every word felt important. She watched as the woman next to her pulled out a small cross pendant and whispered something under her breath. A few rows ahead, the little boy from earlier asked his mother, "Are we going down?" The mother smiled weakly and said, "We're just landing early, sweetheart." Claire turned back to the window. The sky outside had opened up, and through the thin clouds she could now see patches of green and brown, fields maybe. The world didn't look far anymore. Her mind raced. She thought of her parents back home in Chicago. Her father would probably be watching the news by now, not knowing she was up here. Her mother would be in the garden, talking to the flowers like she always did. Claire wanted to tell them she loved them, just in case, but she had no signal. She turned her phone on anyway, hoping for one bar of connection. Nothing, just the same no-service message glowing back at her. The flight attendants reached her row. One of them, a young woman with a calm smile and tired eyes, knelt down slightly and said, "Ma'am, please make sure your seatbelt is tight. Keep your bag under your seat, not in your lap." Claire nodded and obeyed. The attendant smiled and whispered, "You're doing great." Then she moved to the next row, repeating the same words again and again. Like a quiet song of reassurance, the captain's voice returned. "Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." Every time that intercom crackled, heart skipped beats, the engines changed pitch again. The nose of the plane dipped slightly. The world outside grew clearer. Fields, rivers, a road that looked like a silver thread cutting through green. They were lower now. Claire could even make out tiny houses far below, roofs shining in the sunlight. The woman beside her took a deep breath and said softly, "He's doing everything he can." "They always do," Claire nodded. "I know," and she meant it. Somewhere up there, behind a closed cockpit door, was a person. A captain who had to stay calm while hundreds of lives depended on his decisions. The thought humbled her. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The plane began to shake gently, not wildly. Just a reminder of how fragile everything was. A man across the aisle started muttering quietly, as if talking himself through it. Another woman clutched her husband's arm. The child started to cry again, but this time quietly, as if even he understood that this was not the moment for loudness. The intercom crackled once more. "Cabin crew, please be seated for landing." That was it. Claire could feel her pulse in her throat. She tightened her seatbelt, checked it twice. Her hands were damp, but she didn't wipe them. She needed to hold on. The engines roared slightly louder, then steadied. The plane tilted a bit to one side, aligning with something unseen below. Through the window, Claire caught sight of a long strip of concrete far away. The runway. It looked so small, yet it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The captain's voice came one final time, calm but full of quiet focus. "We're making our final approach now. Please stay seated and keep your heads down until we come to a complete stop." And then nothing but sound. The engines, the wind, the quiet breathing of hundreds of people hoping together. Claire followed what the crew had taught them. Head down, hands over the seat in front. Her heart raced, but her mind was strangely clear. She thought of all the times she had sat in airplanes before, scrolling through emails, ignoring the world. She had never once thought about the people up front, about how much trust passengers placed in strangers. Now she did. The ground came closer and closer. She could see details now. Grass, small cars on nearby roads, even people standing near the runway, tiny and still. The plane shook again, stronger this time. Claire clenched her jaw, squeezing the hand beside hers tightly. Then came the sound everyone had been waiting for, the wheels touching the runway. It wasn't smooth, but it was solid. A long, loud roar of friction filled the cabin as the plane rushed down the concrete. The body rattled slightly. The overhead bins trembled, and a few people gasped, but the plane was on the ground. The engines howled as the brakes fought against momentum. The plane slowed, and then at last, after what felt like forever, it stopped. Complete silence. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then the captain's voice returned, this time softer and full of relief. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are safely on the ground." And that was when the cabin finally broke into quiet applause. Not the loud kind you sometimes hear after rough landings, but the kind that comes from deep emotion, from gratitude. Some passengers cried quietly. Others smiled through tears. Claire just sat there breathing. The woman next to her whispered, "Thank God." Claire turned to her and said, "Thank the captain too." They both laughed weakly. A laughter that came not from humor but from release. The plane slowly taxied toward the terminal. Out the window, Claire saw emergency vehicles following them. Bright lights flashing just in case. But they weren't needed now. Everything was okay. When the seatbelt sign went off, no one rushed to stand. People just sat still, taking in what had happened. A few hugged strangers. Others looked out the windows, maybe realizing, like Claire did, that they'd just been given a second chance at life. The flight attendants moved through the aisle again, their smiles now real, their voices softer. "You did great," one of them said to Claire. "Thank you for staying calm," Claire smiled. "You too." When they finally disembarked, the sunlight outside felt almost unreal. It was warm, bright, and full of life. Claire stepped down the stairs slowly, feeling the solid ground beneath her feet. She looked back at the plane, a massive, graceful machine that had carried so much fear and hope in its wings. For a moment, she imagined the captain sitting in the cockpit taking a deep breath of his own. She wanted to thank him in person, but the crew had already guided him away for debriefing. Inside the small airport terminal, people were talking quietly, calling loved ones, hugging each other. Some were crying, some laughing, some just sitting on the floor, lost in thought. Claire found a corner seat near a window and pulled out her phone. This time there was signal. Dozens of messages appeared, from her parents, her friends, her co-workers. They had already heard something about the flight on the news. She called her mother first. When her mother's voice came through, it was shaky. "Claire, oh thank heavens." "Are you all right?" Claire smiled, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I'm fine, Mom, I'm fine. We're safe." There was a pause. Then her mother said softly, "You sound different." Claire laughed a little. "Maybe I am." After she hung up, she sat there for a while, just watching the sky through the window. Another plane took off in the distance, climbing smoothly into the blue. The sight made her heart swell, not with fear this time, but with quiet respect. That night, she stayed in a small hotel near the airport. She couldn't sleep right away. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the clouds, the descent, the moment when everything hung in balance. But it wasn't haunting. It was humbling. She thought about how life could change in minutes, how strangers could become comforters, how a voice from the cockpit could hold the fate of hundreds, and most of all, She thought about how small fears, the ones about work, deadlines, missed opportunities, suddenly didn't matter anymore. The next morning, Claire boarded another flight. Her hands trembled slightly as she buckled her seatbelt. But when the engines roared to life, she didn't close her eyes. She watched, really watched, the world fall away beneath her. As the plane rose through the clouds, she smiled faintly. The fear wasn't gone, but it had turned into something else. Gratitude. A few rows behind her, a young man nervously held his armrest, and she turned slightly to offer him a reassuring smile. "You'll be fine," she said softly. He nodded, uncertain but comforted, and somewhere far ahead in the cockpit, another captain guided them calmly toward the sky. Claire looked out the window again, the same way she always did, but this time, every cloud looked different. Every ray of sunlight seemed like a promise. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, and whispered to herself, "Never again will I take this for granted." And in that whisper was the quiet truth of her journey, that sometimes it takes a moment of fear to wake us to the beauty of simply being alive.